Hi, this is Federico Re and this is InspireTalk. And today I do have another exciting guest. This time he's in the security and risk management sector. And joining me today is Andrew Stark. How are you, Andrew?
Hi, Fed. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Look, thanks for joining us today. I do have certainly a very distinguished guest here, and your, expertise is in the security and risk management, to put it in a few words. But I guess for the viewers and for the record, you come across as being an expert in the development and implementation of risk frameworks, servicing personnel, corporate and government organisations in protecting people, property and reputation. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, but I guess my role today with you is to sort of demystify what that means and how is that relevant and practical, I guess, in the workplace.
Sure.
And how that risk is being mitigated through your type of work. So I guess my first question is, Andrew, what inspired you to get into security risk management from day one?
Fed, I joined the Australian Federal Police in 1988 because I wanted to make a difference in terms of the drug problem that was happening in Australia at that time. I got out of that particular concern pretty quickly because it was just a very different environment than I was expecting, and so to go into the close personal protection of our prime ministers and our politicians was where I ended up and spent the bulk of my time there. We did lots of drug work and lots of investigations work and so on, but more around the close personal protection. So it became a fantastic thing for me. I travelled a lot, met a lot of amazing people, and can say that I've probably worked with 5 heads of state from other countries, so it's been a real fantastic opportunities for me.
Absolutely. Look, and reading your profile, certainly some big names do pop up, and within Australia, Gillard is one of those, and obviously abroad, other heads of state, including Nelson Mandela in Africa and so forth. So I guess that's a unique experience for you to see how that world operates and having such a primary role. So in terms of the challenges that you faced at the very beginning of your career and leading up to what you do now as the Managing Director of Star Corporation. Tell me a little bit about that journey and you know, the first few stepping stones and kind of where you are now.
Sure. So initially with the Australian Federal Police Close Personal Protection, you choose the stream that you're sort of interested in, where you want to go from a career perspective. And so I was able to get opportunities around that, and as you said, worked with people such as Mandela and Blair and the 2 Bush presidents, and the New Zealand president, Chinese presidents, and so on. I was able to have those opportunities through that period of time. I then left. I was with Alexander down for the last 6 years of the Howard government, and then when they lost in 2007, I was then transferred to Gillard, who was the Deputy Prime Minister at that stage. Julia offered me a role halfway through that government to come across and work with her as her National Security Advisor, which I was really keen to do. I wanted to get out of the police force and do something within politics or within my own business. And so I had that opportunity to come across, which was fantastic. And I was able to come across and see some parts within government that I'd never seen before at the highest level. Julia obviously became Prime Minister later on during that period, and so I was able to sit with her on National Security Committee meetings and make decisions, or advise her on decisions made about Australia's security and so on. And that was it was an amazing experience. And so following that, I wanted to go out and work in the not-for-profit sector a little bit. I had this burning desire in me that I wanted to sort of help people who had issues and problems in terms of where they were going, and so I went and worked for Men's Sheds, which was a great initiative from the Rudd-Gillard governments, and then worked with some Indigenous charities as well for another 12 months. And so all that sort of thing led me to being able to sort of start my own business up and use the skills that I've had with the AFP, but in protecting specific people within corporate organisations and within other areas, and being able to make a difference in individuals' lives rather than sort of a much bigger sort of government organisation as it was beforehand.
Great. So obviously over those 20, 25 years that you've walked through, you would have seen a lot, experienced a lot, and there would have been also a lot of changes that have occurred in terms of how organisations have had to adapt to new security risks and so forth. So in a general sense, what are the risks that companies face today with regards to risk management and so forth?
I think one of the things we talked about on the way in, Fed, one of the things I think is the perception of security, which is has changed a lot and it's needed to evolve. I think people still have a belief that a security expert or a security person is a big burly security guard who...
the Men in Black.
That's right. He's very good at fighting and being able to physically protect people, but it's really changed. The whole industry has changed now, where the security is much more of a focus now on risk frameworks and risk management within organisations. And the area that I'm working in specifically within corporate Australia is around staff members of companies, of organisations, and what the responsibility of an organisation is towards those particular staff, and being able to ensure that they're safe and secure, and the benefits that come back out as a result of that sort of feeling of security for the staff themselves. I think that in the past it has been that very the big burly guy whose role it is to stand at the door. But as it's become much more important than that now, as organisations really need their risk interests looked after specifically by an individual person.
Sure.
And that's a big change, yeah.
So within a typical corporate organisation, you have all kinds of people, all kinds of tiers, but I'm guessing right at the top you've got the CEO or other business leaders. So how important is it for the average CEO to have a security or bodyguard, for that matter, looking after them and protecting them?
In a day-to-day matter, the politicians that I looked after, protection drove them crazy, and it's a very intrusive thing on people's lives. And so, unless you're the president of the US or the president, or you have a specific threat against you, going out and having a coffee on a Saturday morning with your wife is probably not an area where you'd need to have protection as much. And so the leaders of organisations, of corporates, and I think do need to have an understanding of someone with them from a security perspective if it's known that they're going to be at a certain spot. So if a person was going to speak at an event and it had been there'd been publicity about it in the media, and there was also some sort of promotion that person would be there, I think it's absolutely imperative that there is someone from a security perspective there, because you're advertising that this is going to happen, that this is a high individual, a person whose value to the organisation is huge, and people know that he's going to be there with plenty of time to prepare. Mental health is a real problem that we're seeing in society more and more these days, and being able to control people who suffer from that is very, very difficult. And so making sure that you've got a security person there who's got some preparation prior to going, and actually accompanying them to an event is becoming so important in every single different, not in government, I know corporates, even in church life, and even in life that you would never associate security with in the past. A lot of churches in the States are employing security around their leadership and their pastors now, just because it's becoming such an issue around them.
So in terms of the changes that have occurred, plus the changes that need to occur, I guess, how do you disrupt or evolve or innovate your industry to ensure that you keep up with new security risks, generally speaking?
There's the obvious risks, I suppose, that are there for everybody to see. I think that the things that are going to become more and more as time goes on are individual needs and individual risks for staff members within organisations. We've created a model which we call a safeguarding model, which is basically we'll go into an organisation and look after all their risks. Now, those risks can vary in many, many different ways. You can have your executives, so some of the security measures that we'll place around executives obviously will be much higher than for someone who's much more junior in the organisation. So we look at that. We then also look at things, events. So a lot of the corporates these days are doing multiple events during the year, sometimes over 350 events per year for some organisations. And so we won't do risk assessments on every one of those events, but we certainly would do them on the events in general to work out which ones do have some risk attached to it, and then mitigate the risk accordingly.
Sure.
For staff members, it's becoming, domestic violence is becoming a really important thing to mitigate these days. My time in government realised that issues get their time in the sun. And at the moment, domestic violence is having its time in the sun, so we need to make sure that there's some funding around that for mitigating measures going forward. But that's another issue that's a really big issue within corporates. And the question, I suppose, for corporates is how do you work out whether or not, where does your responsibility as a corporate organisation stop and start?
Sure.
And that's a really hard question for a lot of people. So
of course.
It's difficult.
So stepping out temporarily from the corporate sector and moving into, say, other sectors, maybe the medium business sector or even small business sector, also looking at other forms of business leadership, including entrepreneurs per se. So you have the serial entrepreneurs that we know about, like the Richard Bransons and so forth. To what extent do they also need to ensure safety and security along the lines of your work?
Yeah, look, so Mr. Branson, for instance, we've worked with him on an occasion. He's because they're so busy and they've got so much on, they become very unpredictable in their movements, and so it's very, very difficult from a security perspective to sort of plan if you were going to sort of cause that person some harm. Look, I think it's very similar to what a business and a corporate sort of environment is. You've just got to make sure that the staff that you're working with, your greatest assets to an organisation are the staff and the key personnel in it, that they've got some measure of protection. And whether that be having a security guard or whether it just be the pre-planning and having a specific person whose job it is and whose role it is to be responsible for that organisation's security is so important.
So in any typical situation, is it equally challenging to dealing with the outside as much as the inside is in the workplace?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And its planning is a very, very important part of it.
Yep.
And so what we'll do a lot of times for staff who have, for whatever reason, have come under risk, we'll do risk assessments on their whole life. And so it's a very intrusive thing to allow someone to come into your life and just learn all about what makes your family and yourself tick. But in order to be able to mitigate risk around that, you've got to understand what the weekly routines are, the daily routines, what time you'll leave, what day you put the rubbish out, whether there's locks on your electrical system at home, what sort of electrical security you have, and being able to make sure that that's going to be enough to be able to protect you. And so we'll put a whole lot of documentations together and do 20 sort of 30-page documents around a person's life and make sure that they're protected from that perspective.
I'm sort of thinking of the future here, the distant future, and I mean perhaps envisaging a science fiction movie, and with that comes the notion of video cameras all over the place. Mm. Is that perhaps sort of where this whole sector is going long term? Yeah,
absolutely. Look, it's wireless technology and technology in general is really, really changing the way we do things. Wireless technology for our domestic violence victims that we work with, we'll make sure that there's a camera system that we've got at the moment that you can put up there and receive vision to your mobile phone, so that if you're going to work during the day, you'll know and have knowledge of whether or not your home is a safe place to go to that night, because the vision would have been fed through to your phone. Mm. Now all that sort of stuff sounds really monotonous and very normal now, because technology's come along so far. But 5 years ago, that wasn't something that you could even sort of put as part of your whole protection measures for an individual person. Security cameras are just, it's just really, really amazing what you can see these days. Sporting events, we've seen some of the detail you can see on an individual person within a crowd is just amazing, and the technology's come so far, and I imagine that's going to get more and more into the future. It doesn't change the fact, though, that you need an individual person who's managing the interests of the security, and I think that's the real take-home message.
Sure.
That I'm sort of trying to get.
I'm just imagining that with your sector, technology obviously being a very important part, would be the ones that would be pioneering new technology. So I guess other industries like science would be investing in technology a lot, medicine as well. But coming back to security, apart from the obvious video camera surveillance, can you sort of envisage other future technologies that might pop up?
Look, the whole wireless technology is going to change in a lot of ways, and being able to, your telephone is an amazing instrument now with so many different capabilities, and being able to ensure that you know where someone is all the time, being able to track people, being able to, the possibilities are endless in terms of what the developments are.
And I'm guessing there are a lot of apps within those phones that deal with all that.
Yeah. Look,
apps that you don't conventionally buy at a shop.
That's right, and we're only limited by our imagination really as far as apps go and what they can do.
Interesting, yeah.
And the amount of emergency management apps, I think, is a really, really important part, where The whole thing around emergency management is you'll have an evacuation once a year, and the people who have the key role forget what their roles are 12 months on. And an app, which we're looking at, I'm not involved in the development of it, but I've been speaking to people about it, where it just spits out the roles of every individual person within that process. It's just a fantastic idea, and it's a really, really great way of moving forward. So apps will be a big part of what we do in the future.
Yeah, look, it's amazing, it's exciting, but it's equally frightening when you think about really the reality of where security risk management is heading towards. But I guess it's an essential part of life and needs to occur.
Yeah.
In terms of growth areas, Andrew, where do you see companies like yours able to, take advantage of shifting trends and disruption occurring and other players in the industry coming into your sector?
Yeah, look, I think that because mine's a small business at this stage, and I think we need to sort of look at strategies around being able to grow that. I think the benefits that we provide as opposed to a massive big security company are that you'll get a lot more hands-on sort of service and people. I think that the one thing about this Fed in security that hasn't been present for a long time is that ability to care and be concerned about an individual matter. And I think that is so important in this thing. People will smell out if there's any insincerity in you at all. And if you're going in, as I said before, around risk assessments, you're going in and looking at a whole person's life, people will very, very quickly work out whether you really care about being able to sort of solve their problem. And that's something that I'm really, really strong on, is making sure that people know that we're going to find a solution to the problem. We'll manage it ongoing, and we'll continue to sort of work with them into the future. I think that they can get lost in the bigger companies, and I think that what smaller companies can do is be a lot more sort of attention to detail around risks that exist.
So I guess looking at it in plain terms, the old-fashioned customer service goes a long way, and in this sense, being integral and being authentic with regards to protecting the welfare of those individuals is really key. But as far as moving from being objective to subjective with your personal care of those individuals, what is the boundary there with regards to really caring for that person beyond the professional side?
It's difficult, and that's the hardest part. It sounds really corny when you say you care and you're concerned about it, and I don't mean that to be in that way. I just think that it's an area that the security industry may not have been very good at in the past, and I think that we can actually make a difference in that particular area of being really, really sincere. As far as being objective and subjective in these situations, it does get very, very difficult, because you've got some people who are in real difficult situations who just can't manage it themselves. Whether or not it's a domestic violence person who's had a death threat and being able to work with them all the way through the court process, going to a court matter with them and watching them look over their shoulder because they're concerned that the person who's made the threat is going to come up and see out his threat, not understanding the court system at all, being able to navigate them and help them through that. You eventually do become really interested in terms of the welfare of that particular person, and that person also tends to then want to sort of seek advice in other areas of life, financial matters or other interests that they may have. And so you've just got to be able to work out what your specialties are and what you can actually help people, and not sort of be tempted to go over there and sort of make everything work for an individual person.
Sure. I'm guessing potentially you would have to even protect your own welfare other than your client's welfare, so I'm sure that comes to mind sometimes. You
do, and look, so the skills that I'm bringing into this sort of thing are basically from the prime ministerial level or the presidential level, where you're dealing with people whose every need is sort of looked after, and we were that person. A lot of prime ministers in Australia who have never driven a car in a number of years. By the time that when they become the prime minister to when they cease being prime minister, there's a number of years where they don't drive a car at all, or don't go to the milk bar to buy milk or whatever. And so all these different skills sort of come and you're doing those things for people without even realising and so on. So you've just got to make sure that the line's drawn at certain parts. Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
In terms of training people internally to, I guess, manage the problem the way you would manage it yourself, is that a reality that people within the organisation can adopt the skills that you have that they can then adopt themselves to their people?
Yeah, look, there's no technical sort of thing about what I do. The thing that I bring, as I'll say it once more, is around sincerity and concern for the matter, but also being able to show people that security is not this big bad thing that is not approachable. And I always try to teach people, whether it be in any setting, that you've got to show a human side to the security, and people will interact and work with you much better. And so I think too long security's been standing back sort of with their arms crossed, sort of sitting against the wall and not interacting, whereas I think people should come up and engage and actually work with the customer and the client to be able to get the best result.
So if I'm a business owner, I'm a business leader, I employ people, I see a potential problem or a threat, when is that critical point where I need to come to you to seek help?
As soon as possible, as soon as you know it is, and as soon as decisions haven't been made that will make it difficult to be able to mitigate that risk. The earlier in the process, the better. For everything's different, I suppose, but for events, we want to be really in the process around an event planning very, very early on, so that you're not coming to us and saying, here's the event that we've got, it's all planned, it's on this particular day, can you do a risk assessment on it? Well, it's all too late because it's already been planned. As far as an individual person, the minute that you think that there's something going on there where there's a threat, we need to be involved very, very early.
So I guess the responsibility would generally typically be the HR people, the HR managers that would be observing and managing these issues to begin with. So if we look at also the skills that they need to be able to do a relatively good job before, say, coming to you, what would those skills be in terms of managing risk?
They need to make sure that the person's safe. I think that's the real key thing. It's funny with a lot of the organisations, there's a massive big process that you'd go through. So again, for a domestic violence matter, you'd have your workplace relations, you'd have health and safety, you'd have counselling, you'd have everybody involved in this whole great big line of treatment. But if the person doesn't feel safe and still feels scared and concerned to walk out the front door at night, then all these issues are irrelevant. You've got to make sure that someone's safe and feeling secure right at the start of the process for all these other things to work. So I think as soon as we can, and early as we can, that's to be able to find a successful solution.
Great.
Yeah.
So Andrew, you've mentioned safety a number of times, and obviously because it's the core of your service and what you provide. But to what extent should a company owner, a CEO, etc., invest in your type of security at the cost of compromising safety?
So Fed, one thing that's amazed me over the last few years is the difference that a secure and happy person at work makes to a company. It's astounded me the amount of times that people have commented to me on the companies that we've worked for about how proud they are of the organisation that they work for, because they've invested in the people and they've invested time and invested security measures to make sure that they feel safe and secure. It engenders loyalty happens really, work performance improves. People's personal lives are much more under control, and that is really relevant in the performance that they do at work. So I think it's a really important thing, and I think as time gets on, I think we're going to find out a whole lot of financial pressures on families as real estate prices are keeping on going through the roof as they are now, and various other religious pressures, wars and so on that we're having, and political wars and so on. I think we're going to see a lot more people needing to be supported by their workplace, and I think that it's really important that the workplace actually does provide that support in as much as they can. Obviously, as we were talking about before, there's areas where you've got to draw the line and say this is beyond where we would be prepared to go. But I think someone's security and their safety and their feeling of being able to live their life in a normal way is very important, and I think that the company's interest and the return that they'll get on that investment is significant.
So I guess what I'm hearing is a safe environment is a healthy workforce, and the outcomes of that can be directly measured like any other form of leadership or management or HR management within the company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So my last question, Andrew, is around the future and change. And if there was one thing you would like to change in the world to make it a better, safer place, what would that be in a perfect world?
Look, the thing that I find in the industry so far is that there's nobody in corporations in general, whether it be in sport, whether it be in the business world, often there's no one there responsible for the physical security and the physical safety of a workforce. Often that tag will get lumped onto another person's role. So it might be the risk guy who's also responsible for the physical security, who's also responsible for this. It just doesn't work. And I think what I'd really love to see is organisations taking that role a lot more seriously. I think that once people in a corporation and organisation become aware that there is someone there who is prepared to sort of go out of their way to make sure to deal with a matter that may not be directly work related but it's really affecting the whole of person, it changes the way people are as an individual. But it's got to come down to the organisation who says we're going to invest in somebody whose job it is to look after the physical security of our staff, and that makes a massive difference going forward. And so I really hope that organisations, whether it be sporting, whether it be corporate, really start to reconsider that. And I think that is happening. The whole funding thing around that is the key to it and has been the key in at higher level sport and what bucket that comes from, that person's role comes from and all that sort of thing. But I think that people are starting to see the value of it a lot more now.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure the viewers out there will be thinking, hey, you're the type of guy maybe I need for my organisation. So if they had to get hold of you, what would be the website that they'd be looking at?
www.starkcorp.com.au.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Look, it's been a very insightful discussion, Andrew. I've learned a lot myself, and thanks for your time.
Good on you, Fed. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you.